phenomenon that the first 2 rows are empty in the classroom. It's a guy who sit in the back as well. So I understand, I think now I've got about 50 minutes left. I'm going to try and talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then invite you to ask me questions. I mean, I live a sort of odd existence because I think that everything I say is obvious, and then it turns out that I annoy most of the people I say things to. So I believe I get asked to speak most of the time because what I say is apparently controversial. So I'll try and be controversial a little bit today and talk about models for teaching and learning, but I'd like to go back a few steps and place it within a context that I think it really is essential for universities to understand. I should possibly just highlight from what Fatima has said that for the last 4 or 5 years, actually, I've spent, unfortunately, a disproportionate amount of my time outside South Africa. So I'm doing a lot of work in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in other parts of the world. So a lot of the things I'm saying about university systems are not actually drawn from South African experiences, although I am working with a few universities here as well. So please don't take offense to any of the things I say that sound offensive. I hope not. But I just want to re-emphasize a couple of what I think are fundamental points when we have any conversation about online learning or e-learning, but which seem to me not to be taken seriously enough in most of the conversations I have within universities. And the first key point, the obvious one I think we all know about, is I think we're all aware that the scale of technological change that we're going through at the moment is not one of those phases where a new technology is being invented as happens once every 10 or 20 years in human history. But actually what we've seen is the introduction of a range of technologies that have capabilities that actually are changing the rules of how society operates. The era before all of this technology was invented. So one of the things I find difficult when talking about the integration of ICT into teaching and learning in a university setting is that, in my opinion, it's not possible to think about effective integration of technology into teaching and learning without being willing to actually challenge the core underlying principles on which we design that teaching and learning. If we think that we can continue doing teaching and learning as we have done for the last 100 years in universities, and just layer technology on top of that, and use it to replicate those models of teaching and learning, there are only 2 consequences. A, the cost will go up, and B, the quality will go down. And there are 2 simple reasons for that. Those models worked fairly well for the context in which they were designed. If we're going to invest in putting a lot of additional technological infrastructure into that environment, that technological infrastructure is largely superfluous to the purposes to which we put it, which means it's just an extra layer of cost. But in addition to that, and those of you who are familiar with trying to use learning management systems may feel some sense of this, we actually have to invest a vast quantity of time and energy in trying to get the technology to be integrated into what we were doing. And the consequence of that is that it increases our workload, but it's actually not adding any qualitative benefit to the way in which we're teaching and learning. So if we continue to believe, as has been critical for the last 100 or so years, that one of the primary roles of the lecturer is to deliver content to students, we're stuck with an intractable problem. Because we are investing our time and energy as academics in delivering content to students and then trying to use the technology to get us to do more of that, which just takes time because it requires us to codify all that content and to put it into the learning management system so it can be delivered to the students. And if you think about it, the vast majority of online learning is actually a process of just taking all of the content you were communicating through your lectures, putting it into structured environments, putting some nice stuff around it, and delivering it to the students. If you continue to do that, you're going to use up a lot of your time and energy. You're not actually adding anything of fundamental educational benefit to the students that they wouldn't have got from listening to your lecture, except we might argue some small benefits around catering for individual learning styles. And in general, the consequence is going to be that your workload will increase. Actually, the workload of academics is being driven through the roof by increased enrollments and increased administrative workload. If technology is just adding to that burden, it's very difficult, in my view, to see how it can do anything meaningful to improve teaching and learning. Universities have always changed in response to social change. It's a myth that they don't change. we're at that moment now where another round of change is necessary. The question that I think we should be asking ourselves is whether we wait for a crisis to propel that change, or whether we start to actually manage the change from within. I think that there are certain sacred cows that we need to tackle. And the predominant sacred cow that I think we need to tackle is the insistence at the school and the university level, in fact, to use the classroom or the lecture hall as the organizing metaphor for resource deployment. I think that until we're prepared to unbundle and rethink the way in which we organize our resources, it's going to be very difficult to use technology effectively. Because I think really what technology provides us the opportunity to do is to free ourselves as academics from this rote administrative responsibility of delivering the content to students. All the students who you are teaching now are living in a world in which content is ubiquitously available. The consequence of that, in my opinion, is twofold. First of all, it indicates very clearly that this historical role of delivering content to students is actually no longer what's required from teachers. But secondly, and much more importantly in my opinion, it signifies very clearly that actually the educational need for students has changed very significantly. What we increasingly are needing to do is to help them to navigate this world of ubiquitous content, to be able to make sense of it, and to be able to apply it to solve real-world problems. Because that set of skills actually increasingly are the skills that differentiate those who are employable from those who are not employable. The two key resources that I consider to be the most important in any university are not actually the technology at all. They're the time of the academic staff and the time of the students. And I think it's that planning around how we most effectively use the time of those two human resources that is missing from our discussions about how we use technology. The biggest gap, even right down into the schooling system, is the tendency for us still to see students as clients or as consumers of education instead of seeing them as active participants in the educational process. Technology provides us then, if we start to rethink in that way, the capability to start reorganizing the way in which the interaction between the students and the academic staff happens, so that it is not constrained by the traditional lecturing model. It makes sense to use a lecture to motivate people or to get them to think about things in a different way. But to use it to transmit content is a complete and utter waste of money in the current technological environment. We also, in my opinion, have a decreasing need as academics, and very, very rapidly decreasing, almost to the point of zero, to actually produce content for courses. But most importantly, in a context like this, where you're not a distance education institution, you actually have students who are there and who should be being mobilized as part of the educational process they are going through to engage in productive content development activities as a key part of what they're doing, rather than just receiving materials as and engaging and just reading material as the key part of what they do. In order for us to shift, there are two key prerequisites for technology. The first prerequisite is, in my opinion, it's inconceivable that we can be planning a university without an expectation that every student has their own connection device. The cost of technology has dropped to the point where it can easily and readily be integrated into the student fees. We should be able to design education systems based on an assumption that everybody has a device that enables them to be productive. We need to provide those students enough connectivity to be able to be online whenever they need to, from wherever they need to be. Although there are some issues that we need to help students to deal with. But part of how we need to help them to deal with that is to expose them to that world and to help them, as the adults who are responsible for their education, to learn how to cope with it. Effective development of teaching and learning models is not possible unless we are providing a device to every student, or ensuring that they have a device, let's say, and ensuring that our campuses have enough connectivity for them to be connected all the time. But once that's done, I think the possibilities become enormous. And we should be designing and thinking about the use of our technology, the way in which we set tasks and responsibilities for students right from the beginning, in a way that communicates the message to them very clearly that they have much higher capabilities than they've been told from being in school, and that the expectation of the system is going to be that they will work hard, because if they don't, they will fail. Once we start to do that, we start to free the minds of the educators to think about different configurations of themselves, using students to drive peer-led learning, rather than always depending on the academic staff members concerned as being the kind of fountain of all knowledge and the solver of all problems. Give the students access to technology, access to a rich, well-designed course environment which leads them out into the internet rather than trying to pre-package and codify and structure all the content for them, and actually forces them to think about what content they're accessing and why they're accessing it and how they're going to use it. I think we have the potential to significantly accelerate the learning process. We have to make the face-to-face interaction time much more productive. In order to do that, we must use the technology to do the things that technology is good at. Allow the face-to-face time to do what face-to-face time is the best at doing, which is to help students to solve problems, to interact, to stimulate critical thinking, and to develop interactive capabilities. And the skills of communication, the skills of serious information literacy and writing skills and those kinds of skills are going to be the skills that are essential in the future. They're essential now. But tackle the sacred cows of standardization and quality assurance. The vast majority of quality assurance is a series of processes of trying to get academics to conform to a predefined set of norms, which are defined down to such a granular level of detail that they actually preclude most independent thought. That we are spending a disproportionate amount of our time as academic staff, in my opinion, adhering to sets of rules and to systems that actually aren't adding value to the educational life of the student. If we continue to seek to harness information and communication technologies with all of their functionality and capability, and particularly because they have put the tools of production in the hands of everybody at such low cost, if we continue to harness them predominantly to support models of teaching and learning that we grew up with and that we feel familiar and comfortable with, we are actually designing teaching and learning models that do not make sense for the world into which our students are moving, and that are going to get progressively more and more expensive until they collapse the education system. And that therefore, we cannot think about teaching and learning models for online learning or for use of technology in a vacuum that is separate from our thinking about the overall teaching and learning methodology. We actually have to change the overall teaching and learning methodology first, and then think about how we can harness the power of that technology to allow us to implement a very different way of engaging with our students. Thank you.